We have returned. Season 6. Episode 16. The Times. They are a Changeling. This is the episode in which we are introduced to Thorax, someone who's going to be somewhat of a major recurring character in the future. And he's a changeling. Oh my god, there's a changeling in the Crystal Empire. And Spike finds him and friends him. We learn a bunch, and Thorax is rejected because he's Muslim. Because he's a changeling. And then we lead to the episode happening, the end. Let me go ahead and say that this episode bounces a little bit around in quality for me, but I would still say overall positive. But as usual, we'll discuss the rating last. First thing I want to mention is that the start of the episode starts very weakly. I know. There's only so much you can do about this. I've complained about this for years. I think the first time this really came up for me was in the Babylon 5 videos, which at this point was like 8 years ago or something. But, point being, recap. The entirety of the intro is just recapping stuff to people who already know it, for the audience who may or may not have forgotten about it. I just wanted to mention it. I'm not going to go off on a whole topic again. I do understand how difficult it is, especially when you have a series with continuity and a long-form series that has continuity. That's whatever. So, they're going through the Crystal Empire. No one's there. Spike's like, oh, whatever. Takes off his outfit, and immediately, whoosh, everyone rushes him. I'll actually admit, that gag got me. Oh, I need to set this out. That got a chuckle. He was right. I had to stay hidden, and as soon as he was there, oh my god, Spike! Now, once again, MLP does something that I've been noticing more and more ever since it was first pointed out to me in MLP. They show, then they tell. Because there's several bits where they make it clear what's going on. There's obviously someone who is impersonating others, and given context clues, there's clearly a changeling present. It's actually several minutes before they flat out say, we have a changeling sighted in the area, and we're worried about checking for people for identification. Showing, then telling. It's good stuff, as usual. A little more recapping, unnecessary, but we do have Twilight and Cadence who still have their song. It got me thinking, though. They didn't really have much in the way of identification in this setting. Which I find interesting, because, we have so many different types of identification in real life, ways to identify that we are who we say we are. I think that song between Twilight and Cadence is one of the only forms of identification that we have total, like anywhere ever. You'd think it'd be the kind of thing they'd at least want to put up at some point, but just food for thought. At least like an ID tag. Like, I know it's very common in Europe, for example, in the EU. I forget what they call it in the EU, but, it's your equivalent of the identifier tag. Over here in the States, we have our Social Security number, which is an absolutely terrible form of identification for reasons I'm not going to go into right now. But anyways, so they prove who they are. We have a little bit of world building. All of this makes perfect sense. Allow me to go ahead and give credit for consequent storytelling and good external continuity. Because what do we know already before this episode starts? We know that there's three things that are big things. We know that the crystal heart is a refractor and an amplifier for the emotion that goes into it. This is how Sombra controlled so much back in the day, by using fear, and this is why the Crystal Empire was so relevant for the rest of Equestria, because so much love would be amplified through it that would hit the rest of the realm, right? So we know that already. We also know, thanks to the crystalling, that there's a lot of more love than usual because of the new baby and the general prosperity they've been having as they've been reattached to the rest of the neighboring countries. And we know changelings feed off of love. This is all we need to know. Now, they established this, but even if they didn't, we know immediately why the changelings would be so interested in this. This is an oil field. This is a dilithium mine. This is a giant Tiberium asteroid. There's so many different things from fiction. This is a absolutely incredible resource-rich area specifically for the changelings. Of course, there'd be a changeling nearby. As has pointed out before, the question of why Chrysalis hasn't targeted yet is a good one. I've always thought that Chrysalis was... well, I don't want to spoil future things because she's going to come up soon, but I've always thought she was setting up what's going to happen at the end of the season. The season ender for this season. And that's why she hasn't deliberately been, you know, moving on the Crystal Empire as of right now. My take on that. I don't know. We'll talk about that later. So, that makes perfect sense. We're with it. I'm with it. Spike then proves he is an absolutely terrible leader. No complaints. He's a kid, but he is a terrible leader. All right, let's see. We're facing a creature that can disguise itself as any one of us at a whim. Let's split up into individual groups so we can never have any kind of, you know, backups or... I mean, right? You never split into groups of smaller than 2 when you're fighting a shapeshifter. That's just common sense. Never mind basic tactics, but of course, Spike. Poor Spike. Anyways, so that fails miserably, and he goes off by himself, and lo and behold, finds a rock that is a change. That's ridiculous. A changeling can't turn into a rock. Then we have a really good, as always, I like to comment on the camera work. There's a scene which probably was much harder to do than it sounds. It's like 5 seconds tops, maybe closer to 3. And it's when he's sliding down the ice slide as he's plummeting towards the chasm. It is astonishing how much camera work is done in that scene, and it's really basic and mundane, and it probably took absolutely forever to do. I just wanted to comment on that really quick. Because, yeah, that's some really fancy animation. So, punk! It's a stalactite. We'll see that later. So then we have the Old Reflection Gag. This is an old Looney Tunes vehicle, which honestly I never actually liked that much. I'm okay with it here because it only lasts a few seconds. That's whatever. For those of you not aware of the Reflection Gag, it's when someone is there pretending to be a mirror. And so they just kind of follow your actions, and they always do something silly, blah, 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 just to prove that it's actually the reflection, and he's like, okay, whatever. But then it's Thorax. Say hello to Thorax. First thing we get is some interesting world building, and a little bit of insight into how the changelings function. So, they hatch in a kind of a larval form, almost a pupa state. That's interesting, and continues to follow the bug vibe that the changelings have. Notice that they immediately and instinctively flock to Chrysalis, and notice that she rears all the changelings, whether or not she is actually their literal mother or not. That's something we'll cover later, much later, actually. All interesting little tidbits, but my personal favorite tidbit is when they all get out of the, when they all hatch, they're all like, and they do the tongue thing, and they do the hissing thing, right? You with that? Now, the reason I point that out is because you might assume, based on the framing of the scene, that that was just them spawning and being hostile. But it's not. We see that exact same animation in the very next scene and in later scenes from Thorax. That is the animation and sound that plays when they are starving, when they're hungry. That means changelings are born hungry. Now, that's interesting in its own right. Not super unique. Plenty of creatures are born needing food, more or less immediately. But what's most interesting about it to me is because that establishes almost an immediate need, let's call it a method of control for the queen, for Chrysalis. You are born hungry, and then, well, I have food. Think about it. And yeah, exactly. There's a lot of little subtle bits that show just how bad Thorax is dealing with this, and how it's taking a lot of his willpower in order to be able to deal with how hungry he is. This is messed up. And in addition to world building, this also helps to further establish Chrysalis's character. It shows the kind of villain she is. It also helps to establish why she hasn't been redeemed, and probably never will be. I have to say that with an asterisk, but to my knowledge, as far as I've seen, Chrysalis is not redeemed. Unlike Starlight, who was traumatized, or Discord, who never knew what he was missing, or Luna, who was just basically externally mind-controlled, Chrysalis is actually evil. Manipulative, twisted, etc. And it's important to note that one thing I'm very firmly in favor of is the idea of introducing a villain who is just truly, legitimately villainous. What I would usually refer to as a Type 4 villain. We were actually just talking about this. because it helps to, if you have a setting with multiple villains, having a Type 4 villain is very helpful in order to flesh out your setting and show in contrast to the other far more in-depth, far more sympathetic, far less villainous villains, right? Now, Chrysalis is not the only one like this, obviously. We've already had Tirek, we talked about him. We've already had Sombra, and we talked a lot about him. But I point this out because Chrysalis arguably is worse in several ways. Not the least of which being the fact that she is so unashamed of what she does and so deliberately inflicts it so regularly upon others. Right? Yeah, she's more of a Palpatine. That's a good way to put that. Whereas Tirek, honestly, Tirek is a little bit more of a typical Sith Lord, if we're going to keep going with Star Wars things. And someone like, say, Sombra? I don't know what a Star Wars equivalent of him would be, actually, to be completely honest. I guess Darth Nihilus would be the closest thing there. Point being, it helps. It helps to establish Chrysalis. So, good scene. Very quick, very efficient. Lots of good stuff. Oh, Vishia, that's a good one, too. So, you know, this then shows, once again, how actions tend to speak more loudly within the confines of My Little Pony, but in real life in general. Spike is freaked out until Thorax literally saves his life. Thorax is all depressed until Spike literally reaches out to him and is willing to help him. Actions. And that's important because that's going to be a trend in this whole episode. Then the episode loses me. And it's irritating, especially because the main theme that is on display here is awesome. And very complex. And very mature and very adult. What is that theme? Well, we in D&D circles like to call this always chaotic evil. Those of you who like Star Trek may know this as the Borg thing. If you see a Borg drone, what do? Other than shoot yourself. But the point is, that's a hostile, right? First thing, that's a hostile. Don't even think about it. Because it's a Borg drone. It's shoot on sight. Now, I spit a lot of venom at Voyager. But one of the things I will always praise Voyager for is fleshing out the plight of the Borg drone. The individuals and the victims. For there are many. We saw a little bit of this in TNG with Hugh. And I talked about that in my rumination of iBorg. Because Hugh, everyone was arguably right to be wigged out about Hugh. Before he was called Hugh, whatever his number was. And they should have treated him as a shoot on sight. They didn't, and by extreme circumstance and unique situation, time, effort, and unique situation, excuse me, let's get all 3 points in there, Hugh was made into an exception. So you see something like that, and there's nothing wrong, really, with immediately assuming that's a villain. Right? This then gets into the wonderful moral myopic area here. This is when things get a little bit murky and gray, because there's nothing wrong with assuming a changeling is villainous, just as there is nothing wrong with assuming an individual changeling can change. There's no right here. In fact, what we see here is a little bit of correct versus right kind of conflicting with each other. Now, you're probably thinking, well, what don't you like about this? Well, the first thing I don't like is the fact that Spike decided to go to the guards to tell this. The second thing I don't like, which is actually in the next scene, is when he goes to Twilight finally, he doesn't actually tell her the truth. Now, I know, we have to have the conflict, blah, 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 but he should have gone to Twilight. If anyone is going to understand this, if anyone is going to be on board with what he's trying to sell here, it's going to be Twilight. And even Spike has enough of a brain to recognize that. Yeah, even Glimmer would have been a better choice than Random Guard A and B or Shining Armor. That irritates me, and it does hurt the episode, because and this is important. This drives the whole central problem of the episode. This one decision, Spike deciding to be stupid in this one moment, pretty much drives the entire rest of the plot. I know Spike's a kid, But this is still just like, come on, dude. And you can't then immediately have him interact with Twilight and then continue to try and push forward the lie, and then have him lie very badly, and then have Twilight not pick up on it. I'm sorry for hampering this point, but I'm just pointing out that this is just, like, remember I said this is kind of a bipolar episode. This is one of those... What are you doing? Anyways, let's move on, because we need to keep talking about the main topic, which is there's no such thing as a nice changeling. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this is a topic that really fits more in fiction than in real life, because as Weouds pointed out earlier in chat, there's nothing wrong with having an always evil race. Lord of the Rings. Orcs. Done, right? And I call them acceptable targets, because it's usually a video gaming concept, but it is still a narrative target. You don't feel bad about shooting a stormtrooper, and you don't feel bad about shooting a zombie. Acceptable targets. Bam. Right? Now, this, the catch here, of course, is the fact that changelings aren't an acceptable target, and they're trying to flesh them out into something other than that. And except nobody knows that except for Spike, and that's where we run into some problems here. Now, hang on. Several people in chat have said if they went to Shining Armor or Cadence first, this would be better. I think it would, because what would happen there, in terms of construct, would be, okay, so, we're going to go talk to Shining Armor and to Cadence. Okay, cool. Now, as we're talking to them, Cadence is like, and just have expressions, right? MLP knows how to use people's expressions in the background to imply character beats or emotional beats, right? So have Cadence considering it and looking kind of hesitant. Shining Armor, however, is the one who's actually talking, and he says, no. He just smashes that down. This is not funny. There is no such thing as a nice changeling. Now go out there and go back to finding it. And Spike's like, okay. And as he's leaving, just have Cadence like raising an eyebrow, like, Now, the reason I specifically mention that is because that helps to emphasize the point. The idea here that this is something that is not right or wrong or correct or incorrect. This is just a situation. After all, as she herself points out later, this is something that's arguably excessive, but they don't know what else to do about it. And it's Cadence who actually makes that point. In fact, that's an extremely important point that the episode spends approximately 3 seconds on, but I'll get there in a minute. So this would be a lead-up to that point later, that Cadence is like, You know, she's uneasy with everything, right? Anyways, moving on, this then leads to Spike going back to Thorax. This is a valuable thing. I'm sorry, I didn't finish my sentence. This is a valuable thing in fiction. Having an always evil race is a valuable thing in fiction. The way that that runs into some problems is because that doesn't really apply in real life. Not really. You can't look at Americans and say they're always evil. You can't look at French people and say they're always evil, right? You can't look at males or females or old or young or people who speak a certain language or people who play warriors in World of Warcraft or PvPers. It doesn't work that way. And I mentioned, every single thing I've just mentioned is a line that I have seen happen, that someone has drawn in real life, that I've seen someone say, everyone who is X is a terrible person. And of course, honestly, this is probably one of the biggest overall themes of the episode. And the fact that they're trying to get across this theme is why they can't go with the changelings are always evil thing, and most likely why they decided to turn the changelings into another race rather than an acceptable target. You know, the whole hive mind thing was thrown out the window, most likely in service of this overall point. Let's move on. I don't know what else to add to that point at the moment. So, Spike goes back. Thorax is like, hey, what's up? Let's change. Okay, so then they go back. And he doesn't tell the truth to Twilight. Whatever. And of course, Thorax and Spike are awful liars. I love the fact that Thorax is a terrible liar, by the way. As someone pointed out in chat, most changelings are terrible at shapeshifting and really bad at it. That is to say, they're bad at impersonating someone. And we have a montage This works out pretty well. It's short, but it's to the point, and it also gets across a point that the show has done, but also real life has done. You know, I mean, several people we've seen have never had friends before and then discovered friendship, and it's awesome. How many of you have experienced that in real life? Let me bring it down to a little more believable / real life perspective. How many times have you had the thought, man, I wish I could talk to someone about X or Y or Z? Man, I feel like I'm the only one who is actually interested in Bob or Blag or Blurg or whatever, right? I feel like I'm the only one... No, you're not, Baron. I feel like, I'm the only one who likes Star Trek. I feel like I'm the only one who likes video games. I feel like I'm the only one yada yada yada. And in real life, I've seen this happen hundreds of times, where they just become aware of the fact that there are other people who share interests and share concepts, and they connect, and they discover friends. At various tiers, of course. There's tiers of friendship. There's gradients there. But still. So, yeah, no, this I'm with this. I'm with this scene, as I always am whenever this show pulls. This is not the first time the show's pulled this. In fact, one of my favorite Discord scenes is when Discord realizes that he values Fluttershy as a friend and has never had one before. And we're going to tie into that again in a minute here, by the way, the Discord thing. Anyways, this leads to some problems here. First of all, they already did some hunger foreshadowing, and he just can't help himself, literally being present with all those people and all those friends and all this family. It's too much. Now, he spends the whole time apologizing and backing off. Nobody picks up on it, of course, because he's always evil, right? Spike has a chance to stand up for him. Spike does not. If I might be so bold, unlike the earlier thing, I think this makes perfect sense and fits perfectly with Spike as a character. I don't think this is him holding the idiot ball. Think about it for a second. Are you really willing to go that much A, against the grain of B, people you consider your overall superiors in terms of friendship, knowledge, experience, and C, potentially lose all your standing as Spike the Brave and Glorious, something re-emphasized in this very episode twice? 3 times. 70 times. It's re-emphasized a lot in this episode. I keep thinking of scenes. You really think he's willing to lose all that in the wake of public opinion of people that he respects in order to stand up for someone he just met, like, today? No, of course he isn't. Why would he? On the other hand, it is worth noting that Spike immediately feels bad about this. And again, very in character. This is not character assassination. This is not idiot ball. This is him making a knee-jerk reaction in the moment based on understandable circumstances, and then pretty much immediately realizing the gravity of what he's done. He then just mopes for a bit and realizes, I've got to go talk to him. I've got to go apologize to him. And then goes and does so. Thorax naturally saves his life, because Thorax is not that horrible of a person. Why would he be? We also have... he shapeshifts into a rock. So that's something they can do now. That's terrifying. Thorax even directly mentions, by the way, the fact that I can understand why you wouldn't want to get rid of everything just for me. You just met me. So, this then leads to that theme I mentioned earlier. The episode literally only spends like 3 seconds on this. Starlight says, is this all really necessary? This feels like a bit much. And Cadence is like, I mean, yeah, but if there's one, there's probably more, and we have to be cautious, yada yada. I don't know what else we can do. The reason I mentioned this is just to bring up that this is the security versus freedom theme, which is extremely common in fiction and in real life. Which side do you sit on? Probably depends on the exact specific circumstances, but one thing that has been made very clear is that as long as you don't go to an extreme of either side, there's no such thing as a correct choice between freedom versus security. This is something I actually talked about a lot over in the Deep Space Nine Ruminations, and in several other works as well. But again, the episode barely touches on this. Cadence is like, yeah, no, we're going with the security angle, even though I don't know if it's the right thing to do, but then Spike shows up. So then Spike sings. First Spike solo song. I should have looked up another word that starts with S, so I could have a whole S sentence there. Little repetitive with the lyrics, if I'm being completely honest. Decent, not terrible. I saw several people in chat were having discussions about the song. So, that was just kind of whatever. I put it relatively low on my list. I didn't dislike the song. It was just like, okay. There are several things I do like about the song, and there are several things I don't. It wouldn't surprise me, Imperial Star Destroyer. We do know Changeling magic is its own thing, although we haven't discovered that yet. First thing I don't like about the song. It takes... Okay, so this episode brings up an astonishingly complex topic. Something that we're still struggling against to this very day. Something that... I mean, I don't want to call it Twitter, but if you just browse Twitter for a minute, you'll see that there are people who still need to get this freaking message in real life, This touches politics, this touches music, this touches video games, this touches television and movies and books and economics and industry and jobs, relationships, friendships. This is a very, very, very complex topic. And the biggest problem I have is a problem MLP does fairly often. It wraps things up very quickly. What effectively happens is the song is the finale. The song happens, there's a brief speech, 2 vets, and then it's done, right? Then we're out. And everything's just done. And that's probably the biggest thing I don't like about the song. It is the finale, and okay. But there is something I very much like about the song. And that is the usage of the camera in order to show people's reactions to certain parts of it in the background. There's 3 things I wanted to point out here. I'm stuttering a lot today, I apologize. First thing, almost every single person, other than Twilight and Starlight, are glaring. And in fact, they're glaring so much, and I was paying attention, they glare through the entire song and after the song has ended. Visual representation of the fact that they're not sold is the important part. Second thing, Twilight is the first one who stops glaring. Twilight is the one who's just like... And, is not quite sure how to deal with that and just kind of is obviously considering his words. The third expression is Starlight's, which is actually in the very next stanza. There's a bit where I forget the exact lines, I should have written it down, but he says something about, maybe this should have changed, or maybe we should give him a second chance. I forget how he phrases it, but it's the line about being given a second chance. And she has a whole animation, or she's just like... And she looks bothered by it. As it just sort of hits home, as he's talking about that. And then, of course... I mean, this is how vetting works, right? Spike vets for Thorax, Twilight vets for Spike, Cadence vets for Twilight. And because of that chain of connection, that means every person in that line now vets for Thorax. Now, thankfully, this is a situation where that's actually done properly, because everyone is actually cool with this, right? Because Thorax is actually cool. Thankfully. Maybe don't shove the baby right into his face right after that. Just a thought. But, whatever. And yeah, this does make sense. If ponies... Ponies have something that is simultaneously a strength and a flaw. The strength side of it is that it's extremely easy to make friends with a pony. The flaw side is they tend to listen to the opinions of others a lot. Now, mostly that comes up in rarity episodes, but vetting happens constantly in this show. Oh, you're with such and such? Well, you're cool then. Or, oh, you're a friend of blah, blah, blah? Well, then all right, you're cool. Sometimes this works out, and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, there's a lot of herd animal going on, and it makes sense. Even ignoring the fact that they're ponies. I mean, hell, we're like this. Now... I would have loved more episodes with Thorax in the Crystal Empire. We do get more Thorax episodes, don't worry. But it would have been really cool if... The way I would have probably written it is I would probably have Shining Armor be someone who doesn't trust him and doesn't like him and is still worried about him. And over multiple episodes of interactions actually becomes his best friend. Shining Armor actually becomes the best friend of Thorax. Because I think the two have a decent vibe that could work there. And I think we could work a lot with that, narratively speaking. But obviously that doesn't happen, so let's just move on. Two last points here. This is Bashir and Miles. It's pretty much exactly what I'm thinking. This is a really big foreshadowing episode. This is not exactly a sea change for the setting. This is the first pebble in what's going to be a landslide later on. And I just wanted to mention that because it's going to come up, and it certainly adds to the significance of this episode. You need to have establishment for an impact to have impact. Second thing I want to show off, and this is something that was asked in the middle of the episode, in the middle of the chat there. This is probably one of the better examples of how the pattern sort of naturally propagates, because there's two possibilities here. Now, I like the second one, but I'll mention the first one first. The first possibility is that the pattern is literally magically affecting anything within its reach, basically. That so many people are... We've already hit the critical point. We've already hit critical mass, right? We already talked about that. We are now at the point where critical mass has happened, and we are now... It's just expanding. And it's going to continue expanding. I mean, we've still got the Axe, and we've still got the Griffins who are now joining the front, and blah, 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 right? So the idea here of... That's awesome, Baron. The idea of it starting to affect the Changelings magically is not exactly out of character, right? That being said, I don't like that as much as the second idea. And the second idea is that he is literally just a freak. This is effectively a form of evolution. You know, he gets... it's not quite evolution, because evolution is generational, but the point is, he has a random mutation. That random mutation happens to be beneficial, so... The idea... Now, we're probably not seeing literally what happened, but at the same time, it's very possible that he is just a random mistake. I don't know how better to put that. That he happened to be born such that he didn't like the idea of being a changeling and didn't want to continue to adhere to her. A fluke, yeah. And part of why I like that is, A, I don't like the idea that the pattern literally affects things in a magical and literal way, but B, and far more importantly, because that's how real life tends to work. Even someone born in a dystopian regime, even someone who is raised on, you know, propaganda, has a chance to be like, well, hang on a second. Right? I mean, history has shown that thousands of times. I'm talking more of a social side of things, an intellectual side of things than a biological side of things, but I stand by the statement. The idea that Thorax was like, well, hold on a second, and just doesn't really buy into the whole idea and doesn't really like this whole idea. But I mean, what else can he do? It's the only life he knows until he is introduced from an external source. Hang on a second. That's friendship? He even says this, remember? I saw your friends. I'd never seen friendship like that before. So now he's seen proof positive of something that he only theorized about actually exists, and and spoilers for later stuff, there's probably quite a few changelings who all have the same general thing. They're not really unique, it's just there's someone who was questioning it and, by coincidence, was introduced to an external concept and then said, oh, that's that, and then started going for it. And once you have someone on the inside, it can spread that way. Hence, the pattern and the pattern propagating. And yeah, honestly, the best example of this in fiction I could think of right off the top of my head is the Cardassian Union. As later DS9 shows, the Cardassian Union had a lot of people who disagreed with it. Now, they went along with it because what else can you do? But there was resistance movements, and there was civilian government movements, and there were people who were trying to help the Bajorans and trying to help each other and going against the government, just pretty much constantly in the background. And over the course of Deep Space Nine, we see bit by bit people who have been doing this for years, since before the events which led to the Union's kind of collapse. And this is exactly the kind of concept I'm talking about. That this is why I like this so much. I like the idea that Thorax is someone who questioned the Cardassian Union, and then, oh hey, friendship, actual friendship. So then he lucks the hell out. He flees. And you know what? If I might add one more thing here. This is so wonderfully horrific because if not for sheer circumstance, Thorax would have starved to death in the caves. But that is appropriate. That is how that would be. The one Cardassian, to keep using that analogy, who questions the Union is probably not going to succeed at anything. The best thing they could do is they can go along with it, they could fight it directly and die, or worse, or they can flee. Thorax chose to flee. Thorax walked away, turned coat, went over the fence, and just left. But there's nowhere else to go. So, Thorax is now out on his own and screwed, and probably should have starved. Now, I don't think the pattern, because there's no such thing as the pattern sending someone, it doesn't work that way. But that being stated, and yeah, he can't go back. He can't go back to the Union. I really do think it is just pure, simple, doodah, clueless luck that led Spike over there and happened to get the two together and led to this thing. Because, again, that's kind of how that tends to go in real life, too. Like I said, this is the beginning of a sea change for the setting, in-universe. And it all starts because one changeling questioned and fled, and one dragon happened upon him. And I love that. Yeah, just like the rainbow thing is another idea of this. You can disagree. That's cool, Imperial Star Destroyer. But you're incredibly wrong. Wait. Hang on. Let me pull my Star Destroyer out here. We'll pull the hammer out for this. Right. Let's go. I think you're wrong. Then you must die. Okay, there we go. We're good. So what do you think, Imperial Star Destroyer? Still got the wires on it. Once upon a time, I did a skit. I don't know what to call it. A feature on TV, and I actually had a string tied to the back here and right here on the front, so I could hold it up, and I could just kind of that way. So I had the strings like this, and I was holding it in front of the camera to make it look like the ship was flying in front of the camera. It actually turned out really well, believe it or not, because I used really, really small strings. I was usually behind in the booth, Mr. Red. But I used really, really small strings to make sure you couldn't quite see it. And I knew how to make sure that the light wouldn't reflect off the string, and I used the right color of string, and blah, 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 blah. But anyways, put that back there. Imperial Star Destroyer still has not typed. I think he's just ignoring me. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, Batman Forever is not exactly a good film, but that line has stuck with me for a really long time. And honestly, because it's such an accurate line if you think about it. So much of things that happen in real life really do happen because of simple, doodah, clueless luck. They just happen. Why politicians go fat, babies starve, holy men are martyred? Why? Why? It's a good line. Anyways. Okay, so that's valid, Imperial Star Destroyer. That's cool. See, I've never perceived or indeed looked at the pattern as an entity any more than I look at math as an entity, you know? But yeah, we gotta rate this. We gotta rate this sucker. I do think that there are several things that drag the episode down. I do. Otherwise, this would probably be a red. But the climax is way too short. The episode doesn't spend the kind of time it needs to on two very complex themes, and Spike is randomly an idiot in the middle of it. Those drag it down. But orange I could completely see. I'm kind of willing to go with orange on this one. Where we at? By the way, this is written by Kevin Burke and Chris Doc Wyatt, which is their first episode for this. Michael Vogel also did this. He did Hearthwarming Tale, Spice Up Your Life, Stranger Than Fan Fiction, and The Cart Before the Ponies, which is a bit of a variety there. Let's go ahead and drag some orange out there. Because, yeah, I know, I'm with it, Well, that's a good question, S.A. Ross. It depends on how long it takes me to audit. Although, actually, I should have mentioned, we're still probably going to do Lore Week and Streaminations next week. So one way or another, we're doing Lore Week and Streaminations next week. Speaking of which, next week we're covering... I know Discord is on that. Hang on, where's the list? Next week we'll be covering Dungeons and Discords, And buckball season. Now, I think I've mentioned this before. I don't really remember buckball season. I mean, I do. You know, the lazy pony, who's a unicorn, is this really great catcher. And I'm sure I remember something else about it. It's Snips or Snails. I forget which one. But he's the good catcher. Yeah, I don't remember much about that. But yeah, next week we will be covering Dungeons and Discords, which is a Discord episode, and hopefully will actually be a good one. And we have some interesting ones after that. But anyways, I have a lot of work to get done before I head out. Remember, we are streaming normally tomorrow, but we are not streaming from Tuesday until I'm done, not counting next Sunday. So, one way or another, I hope I see at least some of you tomorrow, and the rest of you I'll see whenever.